Hello and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake up a cocktail or other mixed drink, have a sip, and then talk about how it is, where it came from, and maybe look at some variants. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's official list of cocktails to see how those stack up. We're in the second section, Contemporary Classics, and it's very cold here, and it's been intermittently rainy, but we have this burst of sunlight at the moment, so I'm thinking it's daiquiri time. Our contemporary classic for the week is the Hemingway Special. Now, the Hemingway Special is an interesting drink for us in that we know pretty much exactly where this drink comes from and how it's changed over the years, so on and so forth. The drink has sort of three separate creators who all worked on the drink one way or another to get it to where it is today. The first being, of course, the titular Hemingway in the Hemingway Special. Ernest Hemingway was in Cuba in about 1932, or actually in 1932, and at some point while he was there, he was taking a walk in the morning and apparently needed to use the restroom, so stopped by the El Floridita, and whilst there, saw everyone was very excited about the drinks that they were having, and so he's said to have tried one of the other patrons' El Floridita daiquiri, which was sort of the signature cocktail of the bar and the bartender Constantino Vert, and said, "I like that, but make mine with double the rum and no sugar." And so from this, the drink was mixed up, and this drink was often known as either the daiquiri for Papa or the Papa Doble. Papa, of course, being a nickname for Ernest Hemingway that was especially common in Cuba in his time there. And so this is, of course, a daiquiri for him, or a Papa Doble, meaning double because it was double the rum. Now, there's some whole story about how he avoided sugar in drinks because of some health conditions he had and stuff. Maybe, but the man drank like 1,000 drinks a day. I don't think health conditions were number one on what he was working on there. I think he just didn't want a sweet drink and wanted a lot of rum in it. So that is the initial drink, and then that was put on the menu at the El Floridita, and they were associated with that. At some point, Vert's cousin-in-law, Antonio Milan, took over as head bartender, and he ended up adding the grapefruit juice and Maraschino Liqueur to the drink to make it what it is today. So technically the Hemingway Special as we know it today isn't exactly what Hemingway ordered, and isn't exactly the same as what he called a Papa Doble, or what folks called that, but this drink is often also referred to as a Papa Doble, even though really that should just be a very dry daiquiri, essentially rum with a splash of lime juice in it. I do think it's, of course, worth telling here the other great Hemingway restroom story, because apparently this drink was created because he stumbled into the bar purely because he was looking for the loo. Of course, many years later, when he was living in Key West, he frequented a bar called Sloppy Joe's, where he was every day. And at some point, they were closing down to be remodeled, or for some reason, for a while. And so he walked into the restroom, ripped a urinal off the wall, and took it home. It's still there today, where it's part of some sort of fountain. And apparently when asked, he said, "I've pissed enough money away in that urinal, I feel like I own it." So there's another great Hemingway restroom story. With that out of the way, we're going to make two versions of the drink today. We're going to do one following the IBA spec, which seems a bit heavy on the grapefruit and a bit light on the rum relative to what would make sense to Hemingway's proportion, but I think will be a fairly tasty drink, so we'll make it their way first, and then we're going to make one according to the current recipe that's actually in use at the El Floridita. And of course, at El Floridita, they're famous for doing blended daiquiris, so that's how they make it to this day. That's how they've made it for a very long time. They're the ones who first popularized such a thing, so we'll follow their proportions and also do our first blended drink on the channel. So let's get right to version 1. The IBA spec, of course, is a shaken drink, so we're going to start with our shaking 10, and we are looking for 15 milliliters, or half an ounce, of lime juice. Then I'm going to go ahead and juice a pink grapefruit. And we're looking for 40 milliliters, or 1 1/3 ounce of our grapefruit juice. There are some little seeds in there, but we're going to double strain this later, so I'm not concerned. and a weirdly high proportion of maraschino compared to how they make the drink in Cuba today. We want 15 milliliters, or half an ounce, of maraschino liqueur. I always prefer Luxardo, but use whatever you like. And then finally, we need to talk rum. This, of course, obviously was made with a light Cuban rum, something like Havana Club. We've talked about this on multiple episodes recently, it seems like, but that product, of course, does not exist in the United States. There is a product with that name, but it's unrelated. The actual Havana Club from Ricard is not available here. In previous episodes, I generally pull out Bacardi when we need a fairly low character, unaged, light rum. That's a similar product, and of course I've talked about the history of Bacardi before. I'm out of Bacardi, and it's just not that fun. We've already used it to make a daiquiri before, so we're just going to use flavorful rums today, because why not? This is Clément Rum Agricole. We used this in some previous video for something. This is a Martinique Rum Agricole. It's going to be grassier, it's going to be funkier. It's got a little bit of banana character, but in a more fresh agricultural sort of, I'm just stealing words here, in a more fresh, really sort of vegetal way. It's a fun rum. We're going to go ahead and get 60 milliliters, or 2 fluid ounces. Like I say, that seems a little bit light on the rum relative to what would have been sort of time period accurate. The initial version that was popular, the pop Hapa Doble back in the 30s, 40s, that typically had between 3 and 4 ounces of rum in it, so 90 to 120 milliliters of rum, as opposed to the 60 in this. But hey, what the heck, it's still going to be very good, and this is a much more characterful rum, so it's actually probably plenty. I'm going to grab some ice, we're going to shake it out. And then we're going to double strain that into an ideally chilled coupe. Now, IBA has this without a garnish. It is common to garnish this with either a lime wheel or a maraschino cherry. I like having the garnish, but I want to taste it first, just because I haven't made this before in this exact proportion or with this rum, and sometimes I do think it needs just a hair of simple to kind of open up, so we're going to taste for that first. So obviously a lot of rum funk on the nose with just a little bit of citrus. It actually reads as the lime more so than the grapefruit on the nose. Yeah, I think I would like it a hair sweeter, but I think it reads fine right there. We can get our flavor notes. So we're going to go ahead and garnish it. I like a maraschino cherry in this one. As always, ideally use a real maraschino cherry, whether that's Luxardo or something like these Oracellas, which are made here in Seattle. A cherry that's actually spent time in maraschino liqueur. And that is our IBA spec, except for the type of rum and the addition of the cherry, Hemingway Special. So it's an interesting drink. It's dry, but it's not too dry at all. There's enough sweetness in the grapefruit, in the lime, and in the maraschino, which that's probably why this doesn't need much additional sweetness, is because there's so much maraschino liqueur in here relative to how I would normally make this. Yeah, I get the rum funk right from the beginning, but there's so much happening further back. There's like a sweetness that's immediately present happening with the fruits further back on my palate, like before I've even had a chance to read the funk up at the front. Yeah, so it feels very substantial, funky, slightly alcohol, but immediately there's just a party happening. It's very bright, it just zings, it feels very refreshing. I totally get this proportion. And I think, honestly, if you were to follow sort of IBA spec and tradition and use a Bacardi or a 1-year Havana Club or something like that, some other unaged like Puerto Rican or Cuban rum, this would actually read as pretty dang sweet with that amount of maraschino. I really like it. There's not much to say about it. It is definitely reminiscent of a daiquiri, but there's a lot more actual fruit character, which is the maraschino and the grapefruit working together. It doesn't really read as grapefruit, but it reads as just bigger, brighter fruitiness, as opposed to the daiquiri, where the lime is very much there as a counterpoint to the spirit, not as lime in and of its own right. Delicious drink, no complaints about it, not much more to say about it either, but I do think it could be a fun place to experiment with all sorts of different rums. I'd be interested to see what something with quite a bit of age on it does in this. I think that would go well with the maraschino. Alright, for our second version, we're going to make the version that they currently make at the El Floridita. I got the recipe because it was given to Simon Difford. He has it on his site. They're not as a separate drink, it's just mentioned in one of his write-ups. But we're going to make that version. I am just going to mix in a mixing glass over here on camera because A, I hate my blender and don't want to show it off and give it any sort of advertising because it sucks. And B, I don't really have a good way to power it from here. The only power right here is like a power strip plugged into a power strip plugged into a extension cord. Doesn't seem like a good idea for a high power thing like a blender. So we're just gonna pour it into a mixing glass here and then I'll go blend it off screen. We're gonna start off much the same with our 1/2 ounce or 15 milliliters of lime juice. But from here, everything's gonna slightly change. We're gonna use 30 milliliters or 1 ounce of our grapefruit juice. Down from, again, it was 40 milliliters in my previous drink. For Maraschino Liqueur, we now want just a bar spoon. Then for rum for this one, we're gonna probably finish up my Plantation 3-star. Still obviously not a, light Cuban or Puerto Rican rum, but a little bit less different, I suppose, than the Clément. And just one of my favorites, kind of my go-to well rum, which is why this bottle's almost empty. So let's hope we have the required 90 milliliters or 3 ounces. So as you can see, this is much closer to what I think the sort of original would have been, which I think would be somewhere around 3.5 ounces of rum. This one is much more in line with that, and with the lighter amounts of maraschino and the lighter amount of grapefruit. I think this one's going to be very dry. So before I actually blend it, I'm going to give it just a very brief stir and just check it to see if I want to add a Yeah, again, I think it works. The Plantation has some inherent sweetness to it. So this is the wrong decision. You don't need to listen to what I say, not what I do. But I want just a half bar spoon of simple in here. Purely to my taste, like I said. The recipe does not call for this. You should do however you're felt led. I'm going to go take this off screen, blend it up with some ice, and we'll come back with a El Floridita version of the Hemingway special. And this would traditionally there be served in a hurricane glass. I do not have one. I went to buy one today, and no one had a good one available. I found one out of 3 stores I visited, and it was really crummy. So I've got this Riedel burgundy glass, which sort of has the shape of a hurricane glass, even though it's not meant for such an application. And we're just going to go ahead and pour that right in there. We'll throw a lime on the rim and put my tasting straw back in there. Obviously, it's not calibrated for the size of this glass at all, but it's just the idea of it. And this is roughly the El Floridita version of the Hemingway special. So it's very cold. Yeah. There's a lot more water in it now. Yay. So I'm just not generally a huge fan of frozen drinks. We've added a lot of dilution, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think I like the underlying drink. I certainly liked it when I tasted it pre-chilling and mixing. Because it's so much colder here, for some reason that's kind of deactivating the grapefruit for me, and I'm really not getting any maraschino coming through. So I'm getting rum, but I'm missing some of the sweet notes of the rum. I'm getting some of the lime. So I'm really getting sort of daiquiri vibes, without the sweetness, without the grapefruit, without the maraschino. I'm getting just sort of strong daiquiri vibes. There's just this little extra thing to it, but partially that's because of the rum I'm using. I think Hemingway would quite like this. For me, I don't see why we went to the trouble of blending that. Well, thanks so much for coming along with me today as we looked at the Hemingway Special, or Papa Doble. I think it's a great drink overall. Just like the daiquiri itself, it's a drink that is a great canvas to experiment on. I think neither version we made today is quite what I would consider to be my version of it. I think that my personal version of it is something like the proportions of the Floridita version, with maybe 2 barspoons of maraschino instead of 1, and then definitely not over ice, just serve it up instead. And that's kind of where I'd like to be with the drink. But I think the IBA's version works fine too. It's just quite a bit more sweetness, quite a bit more grapefruit, maybe a little too much for me, but make it however you like. I really do think this is a great place to play with rums. I think that making this with a Bacardi or a Havana Club or something is fine, but it is actually much more fun with something like this Clément, or the Plantation 3-Star, etc. Anyway, I'm just rambling now about being excited about daiquiris. Please do all the YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, watch previous videos, leave a comment. I really appreciate all that stuff. Visit the blog at shakingandsipping.com. We'll have a write-up on this and each other drink, as well as most weeks, the day after the video posts, we'll have IBA in real life, where I'll have a post from going to a local Seattle cocktail bar and ordering the drink and seeing if they make it often, if they have spins or variants on it they like to do, if they have stories about it, etc. So check the blog for that. The way you'll know whether we're doing one of those or not is that when those post, I will post on Twitter at shaking_sipping if we have one of those. So follow there for very infrequent posts with those sorts of announcements. That's all we have for you this week, but we'll be back next week with the next drink on the IBA's list. Until then, happy sipping. Cheers.